All right, welcome everyone. My name is Mick Kirsten. I'm the creator of the Eclipse Mylyn project and the CEO of TaskTop Technologies. And I'm here with Stefan Pingle, one of the principal developers at TaskTop and one of the first and most prolific Mylyn committers. And today we're going to show you how we've wired together our collaboration and contribution stack and tool chain that we use on Eclipse, to contribute to the Mylyn project, that we use to communicate and collaborate with our community, and it's been adopted by a fairly large number of Eclipse projects. And to give you a sense for the sort of tooling that we use, and the whole goal here is that you'll get to see how pieces of this you can apply to your own day-to-day work, to your own tool chains. To position Eclipse, it's actually quite a large code base, and quite a large number of committers and contributors. And the interesting aspect that of those of you who don't work on open source day to day will see is a little different. Is just it's got this massive community of contributors, which in the end is similar to your user base, similar to your ticketing system. So Eclipse has been growing. Right now we're looking at, for the Juno release that came out in June, it's 55 million lines of code. So in the order of magnitude of the Windows OS in terms of the size of the code base. And we've got altogether a fairly large number of projects. So in those projects, you can think of them as teams. So 72 teams. And what's been holding it all together, it all started as, back in the days of Eclipse 3.0, back when it started just over a decade ago, it was really just CVS and Bugzilla. And as you can imagine, as those lines of code grew and grew, that was insufficient for managing all the collaboration that was going on in Eclipse. So what we've got now is this dramatic growth in basically the amount of collaboration all still hooked together around the source repository and the issue tracker, which again, like with Mozilla projects, is Bugzilla. There's a pretty huge number of these things that we call tasks, the Bugzilla bug reports. We're now edging onto 400,000 of those. And each release is this series of communications and collaborations around that. And we'll show you how what the Eclipse Mylyn project did is it took those and made them the anchor of collaboration and communication around Eclipse, and then hooked everything up around that. So what this meant previously is that when we were using CVS, Mylyn would connect your CVS commits to the tasks that you were working on and make it very easy to work with patches. Now it's all changed. We've got a better set of tools for managing this, where things are more linked into this more connected graph that represents our collaborations on Eclipse. And the two new tools in our toolbox that help enable this are Git, and Eclipse is actually now in the process of ramping down CVS support. So I think by the end of the year, there'll be no more CVS at Eclipse. That legacy will be gone. Only Git will remain. And then how Gerrit's added this new dimension of code review. So you'll see how we've now connected basically the issue tracking, the task side, with the review side, with the commits, and then also the build, because the build system is what hooks us all together. All of those projects that you see on the previous slide, these are all connected with a very large Hudson instance that's running many build plans. How many build plans?
200.
Yeah, 200 build plans. So this is basically our application lifecycle management stack that we'll be talking about, and we'll show you how we work with it day to day, and Stefan will give you a few demos of what an Eclipse committer's day is like, and then you can compare that to how you work day to day, and how we can basically help you optimize the way that you work with these freely available and open source tools. So it used to be a lot worse, and Stefan's going to show you a little bit of what it was like to be working on Eclipse 5 or 6 years ago. And what we were dealing with that is actually, as recently as a year ago, in terms of dealing with this, basically this massive amount of input that we were getting from, who our customers are. So our open source users, ISVs, and vendors want to contribute to the Mylyn project. Because one thing I should mention about the Mylyn project, it's been one of the most open and transparent and contributed projects on Eclipse. 1/7 of the work done on Mylyn has been done by non-committers. So people just submitting their patches. And, it's not fairly recently that, previously I was, then Stefan was completely overloaded with dealing with the number of patches, the number of submissions of people wanting to change Mylyn for their needs, for embedding into their commercial products, or for just streamlining around their workflows. So this is what we used to do.
Yeah, to give you a sense of the challenges that we're facing, I'm going to take you through one of those contribution cycles. So when somebody had an idea, what they would typically do, they would file a bug in Bugzilla and attach a patch. And then the committer would go in download that patch, apply that to his Eclipse workspace, try to get things building, trying out the feature, and a lot of times we would notice that some part of the code base didn't compile anymore. It certainly worked on the contributor's workspace, but on a developer workspace, that patch might have not worked. So we would go back in Bugzilla and ask the contributor to attach another revision of his change. And we would go through those same cycles again, grabbing that patch, applying that to the workspace, trying out the feature, running tests, and then maybe handing this over to another committer on the project to also verify if that change made sense. And once we're happy with it, going through multiple cycles of this, would commit it to CVS, then trigger off a build in Hudson. And what would often happen is that once the build ran on Hudson, it was executing all of our integration tests, maybe integration tests on a different platform. The build would break, somebody would notice, would have to find out who actually did that commit, blame them, and then blame the contributor eventually, and would go through this whole cycle again. And what you can see here is that there are a lot of manual steps in this process. It doesn't scale very well. And we end up with failing builds, which is something that we never want to have in our repository. We always want to be able to make changes to master and not worry about failing builds. And the feedback that the person who made the change initially comes very late. Until they know if that change actually works, a lot of time passes. And all of these different systems that we use in our day-to-day development, like Hudson, like CVS, like Bugzilla, they're not very well integrated. They have some connection between the systems, and we have some of these tools available in our IDE, but things like our Hudson builds, like our Bugzilla tasks, that's something that we're missing from our IDE, which is what, as developers, we work with day to day.
So and this is similar to what you might have experienced when you, say, joined a new team, right? You had the amount of setup that you needed to do in your own workspace, and in terms of hooking up and understanding the way that the builds were happening, the way that the team worked, and the way they reviewed code, it took a lot of friction. We had to resolve it, right? We had basically 4 core committers at the time, and again, this massive input of patches of people wanting to evolve the project, which was working, but the limiting function was how quickly we could review those. So what we did is we created both the sort of server-side integrations between those tools. Those are just part of the Eclipse infrastructure. And we drove those into the Eclipse infrastructure, and then the IDE level integration. So this could be all hooked up, and it could become much easier for people to contribute. So.
And as a result of this process, we end up with a lot of accidental complexity. And Mick's now going to take a closer look at the IDE and look at some problems we're facing there.
Yeah, because in the end, when you're dealing with this, it's a sort of frustration of, again, basically doing these administrative tasks and not coding, not doing what you want to do on that project, not adding that cool new feature, or ramping up and fixing that set of bugs. So the whole idea is that we get rid of these manual processes, some of which have to do with your project ramp-up time when you're working, some of which just go on and on, right? If you don't have this level of automation or this kind of integration in your IDE, you're dealing with this manual friction, every day of your life as a developer. So the whole idea is that we want to get rid of this friction and then the kind of distraction that results from this. So the fact that when you're waiting on a request from somebody, for us it'd be a contributor, you're never staying and you're not coding anymore, right? You're just always waiting on the output of a build system, on the input of someone who's blocking you from getting your change into a system. And in the end, these are things that we've recognized, just do not make us happy. The friction and distraction are what kills our day. What we're after, and the whole goal, and this is actually one of the oldest slides from the Mylyn project, the whole goal of the project was to do the opposite, to do the things that makes us happy as developers. And if you've heard of Michael Czechimansky's concept of flow, or there's a new movie now that's called Happy that talks about this. As software developers, the best thing about our job is that we can get into the flow of our work when we're programming. And if if you've got that green mess that you saw on the previous slide, that doesn't happen. But the whole idea here is that We put in place the flow, and flow takes focus. If we're getting distracted, whether it's by these disconnected systems or interruptions, we're unhappy. When we get flow and focus, when we're in our IDE and we're writing code and things are being built behind the scenes for us and the contributions are making it out into the builds and getting released, then we have this feeling of satisfaction from the coding that we're doing. I got pretty interested in this when I used to, before I started working on the application lifecycle management side of tooling, I was working on basically tools for better modularity. So that was the Aspect-J development environment, aspect-oriented programming, a lot of those concepts have now made it into some of the runtimes, so the JVMs and CLR, and into frameworks like the Spring framework. I realized that we were kind of getting the flow and focus that we would work previously when we had these simpler systems, when people were working, say, in Smalltalk VMs or in very very constrained systems, would just come from getting better abstractions. So this constant march of getting from object-oriented programming to more dynamic languages to things that make it easier for us to write code at the language level or at the framework level, we were getting diminishing returns in terms of our happiness on those, right? If you have, closures are really important. They're not going to make your day twice as productive, sadly, when you get them in the JDK. Or in the JRE, I should say. So I took a step back, and this was a while ago, and looked at what was actually happening with our day, where we were wasting the time, and did my PhD thesis on that. And then someone followed on with some work that illustrated this even better, and basically showed that a developer's day, more than half of it is this is like excluding meetings. So more than half the time you're spending in your IDE, which you're already wrestling to spend more time in, is just thrown away on dealing basically with these friction, these distractions. So switching applications when you're getting into a VM and testing things, handling the sort of interruptions that come from, waiting on someone to review something of yours, navigating the code and searching code for the stuff that you need to get your work done. And this is just very clear from the way that IDEs used to look 8 years ago, before we started driving this notion of task focus into the IDE, which is, Mylyn pioneered, which is now actually a subset of Mylyn is now one of the key things that's new in Visual Studio 2012 that's being released soon. So just to get away from this world where most of what you see in your IDEs are relevant, to both in terms of the code and in terms of the collaborations, to most of what you see being what you work on. And what you're working on is you're collaborating with people in the social way on tasks, which are these activity streams with comments and maybe attachments and reviews and change sets. You've got builds that you're running that you want to make sure are successful, and you've got code that you're editing. So to go away from that view where most of those icons are these methods that are all in one file or in one package, that most of which are relevant to your task at hand, into that kind of view, where everything's linked up in this kind of mashed up, much more social environment, which previously Mylyn was bringing in tasks and connecting code. What you're going to see today is the way that reviews and distributed version control are now a first-class part of that. So what we want to get rid of is these kinds of overheads of multitasking, searching, interruptions, all that stuff that you saw in orange, and just get as much of your day as possible onto the productive work where you're in the flow, where you're actually hacking code and creating cool things or fixing challenging bugs. So Stefan's going to start with a demo, and we'll show you we'll just review some of the key concepts of Mylyn, and then go into some of that new functionality on Gerrit and Hudson and Git.
All right, so this is just a regular Eclipse. And one of the things that Mylyn provides is a planning perspective that just has a little bit less clutter. So I'm going to switch to that. And this has a central view in Mylyn, the task list. And the task list has all of our tasks. If they're in Bugzilla, Jira, HP Quality Center, IBM RTC, it doesn't matter. This is our central hub for all of our collaborative activity. And in order to get those tasks into our task list, we have to set up task repositories. And that is like your SVN or CVS or Git repository. You basically provide it with the location, a URL, and credentials, how to access your tasks. In this case, I've set up a local Bugzilla instance because we don't have network connectivity here. And then in a second step, what you do is you create queries in your task list. And queries are basically your personal view of that task repository. So it's all the tasks that you're interested in working with. For instance, in my task list, I've set up a query for all of Frank's bugs, which is somebody I collaborate with. So I can say I want to see all the tasks that are assigned to Frank.
And by the way, even if you use NetBeans, you can still pay attention here because on Thursday, Stefan and some of the NetBeans teams will be showing you how this has now been, how Mylyn's now been integrated with NetBeans. So.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see that. And once you run,
I'll find out for you by the end of the session.
Once you run this query, it downloads all these tasks from the Bugzilla server, in this case, to your local workspace. And Mylyn actually caches them offline. So I don't have to wait when I open these tasks. They open instantly. In this case, these tasks are coming from Eclipse org. And in this task editor that opens, I get access to all the different attributes on the task. So I see the priority. I can edit this. I can change anything here in the task editor. I see the entire comment stream on this task. And I can work with the attachments on the task. So I can attach a new screenshot. It's very helpful if you have a defect and you want to demonstrate where the problem is, and I can just capture this screenshot. I can highlight something in here. And then once I can provide a description, once I had finished, that screenshot is attached as a new attachment on the bug. I also get rich editing in this editor. So I get things like wiki text, where I can provide headings. I have all these little helper things that I'm used to from my IDE. I also get in this task editor. So I get content assist, for instance. I can link to other bugs. If I know a keyword of something that this bug might relate to, I can say see also. And then if I use content assist, I get a list of all the tasks in my task list that reference this keyword. And once I enter this, it turns into a link that I can actually click. And then if I actually click it, it should open this task. OK, here we go. So I can instantly navigate between all my different tasks. I have things like the outline, all integrated.
So what we've basically done here is taken the IDEs. The IDEs, among IDEs, has this functionality for navigating structured information. It's all indexed, it's all accessible, it's usually just code and methods and bundles and files and so on. We've applied that to navigating the structure of your tasks and issues. And what we've noticed is that these are sort of a key unit that we can hook all this collaboration functionality onto, that Stefan will show you. But the main thing is you've got this, just like IDEs created an abstract notion of files and the structure under those files, basically the document object model under those files. We've done the same thing for tasks, wherever your tasks live. So whether you use Jira or Bugzilla or Mantis or Track as the open source things, you use closed source tools like IBM's Rationality Contour, the HPALM, or Rally, or version 1, or Mingle, or we've got a slide for the various tools that are supported. It's almost all the popular ones with developers. They show up in here, and they've got this common functionality. It's like your sort of rich email client, all native, all offline, so it's all instant. You're never waiting more than 200 milliseconds for, if you click things properly, for things to open. It's basically, you're navigating your, Stefan's twitchy with a mouse. You're navigating all your tasks as quickly as your code. Because again, you're referring to those as much as you're referring to your code now, given the way that self-development's changed and become much more social and much more collaborative.
And what's really nice, as Mick is saying, tasks are really like a first-class part of your IDE now. I can now, like any file, I can save this change. And in the task list here, on the right, what you'll actually see is a little black outgoing error, which means there's a saved change that I haven't yet transmitted to the server. So only if I press submit is this change actually going to be submitted in Bugzilla, and then it's going to be visible to everybody else. And usually what happens if I make a change, then all of the people subscribed on this bug will get an email notification that somebody commented on this bug. with Mylyn, I don't need to switch to my email client to actually see those notifications, but I can synchronize these queries here. Usually they're synchronized automatically. And what I'll actually get all notifications for all the incoming changes. And if I hover over this task here, for instance, on the task list, I see this little blue arrow, and it tells me that there's a new comment on this task. And if I open it, all the things that have changed while I last looked at this bug, since I last looked at this bug, are highlighted in blue. So I see the new comment was made, and I see there are a bunch of new attachments on this task.
So what you're getting from your tools like Jira, like Bugzilla is basically this team view of you've got everything. You can easily navigate all the issues in your web browser. You've got all of that. The key difference of the approach with Mylyn has always been it's extremely personalized to you. The task list, it doesn't only have your, what you've got in Jira. If you're using another repository because you work with another team, so they're using, say, a rational team concert instance or something else, you've got all this information in your task list and all your read state. So everything that you've read or not read is caught up on. So scroll down, Stefan. And if you've seen in the task editor, if you've seen some of these tasks, because so much collaboration happens around them, everything's collapsed that you've read already. So you're only seeing what you need to see. Everything is always focused for you. It's very, the big difference with Mylyn is when you used to look at people's IDEs before this, they would all look very similar. With Mylyn, everything's completely personalized to you, to what you've seen before, to what you care about, to who you collaborate with. And red state is a very big part of that. And it layers over top of any repository that you use.
And what you'll notice if you look at my task list, it's really, really simple to create these queries. And you end up with a lot of tasks in your task list. Now, I've even filtered the completed ones. But if I unfilter, you can see there are thousands of tasks probably in this task list. I think my task list has 10,000 tasks. I think Mick's
I've got
20,000. So it becomes really easy, and you can easily get into a mode where this task list gets overloaded, which is the very same thing that we're trying to avoid. So we added this planning mode where I can switch here from on the top. I can go from the categorized into a planning mode. And this organizes my task list by days of the week.
It's like getting things done, basically, that style of organizing your work when you've got too much coming at you. It's all about giving you more control over your day when when there's a lot going on around and letting you focus.
And I see down here, I see all the unscheduled ones, and I can just simply drag and drop them into these buckets. And that means basically when I drop a task into the Wednesday bucket, means I'm planning to get to that task on Wednesday. And you can see the blue ones. Those are the ones that are scheduled for today. If I don't complete a task today that I have scheduled for today, then it'll automatically move to the next bin. So on Tuesday, all of these tasks, if I haven't completed them, will be in my Tuesday bin. So I never lose track of them. And one thing I find really useful is if I open a task, a lot of times I don't have the time to review it in all detail. And I'll just click this button up here, which scheduled it for today. So it shows up on top of my task list, so I know this is something that I want to look at later. And it's like starring an email. I can just click the button up here in the task editor, and it shows up here in my task list. And sometimes there are these weeks when you don't get anything done and tasks just keep piling up. And that's when I'll use the this week bin, which is really useful. It's basically, it's not a particular day of the week, but it's just something that I want to get to someday. So for those tasks, I put them in the this week bin, so I'll always see them, but they don't show up on top of my task list. And even now, I have a lot of tasks visible here. So we added this notion of focus to the task list. Once I press the focus button, the task list filter everything that's not relevant to me for this work week. So I only see the tasks scheduled for this week, and I see all the tasks that have incoming changes that I haven't looked at yet. So here's another task with a new comment. So if I open this, it disappears from the task list because I've now read it. It's no longer relevant. If I still care, I press this button, scheduled for today, so I have it in my focus task list again.
So you basically go from the state where you've got your email inbox is filled with change notifications on issues that you're watching to the whole goal being in your IDE, you've got this task list that's all the stuff that you need to be coding and be productive, and it doesn't have a scroll bar. And usually we have these best practices where in the morning you'll blast through your incomings, schedule things for 2 weeks from now, pretend you'll do them then, and get to the point where you don't have a scroll bar. So you can then start what Stefan will show you in a moment, which is get back to coding.
All right. So one feature that we added recently, which I find really useful as well, is you now have a index over all the tasks in your task list. Since they're all cached offline, I can search over all of them. And you can even use Content Assist in the search box now, where you can say, okay, I want to search all the comments for the keyword secure. And it'll show me all the tasks that match that search string, which is incredibly useful if you're looking for something. So anyway, what we now want to do is, now that we've found a task that looks interesting to us that we want to work on, we want to activate it. And the easiest way to do that is here from the task editor, there's a big activate button, which basically just means we're now starting to work on this.
And if you haven't used Mylyn, this is, other than you first get comfortable with a task in your task list and just working with them there, so you're never copy pasting ticket IDs and so on. The bigger step in changing the process is this notion of activation, and it kicks off a whole bunch of automation behind the scenes that Stefan will show you. But that's a thing you've not had to do before, is actually activate those tasks.
Right now, if I look at my package explorer, I see all the projects in my workspace, and I see all the classes, methods. Basically, that whole compiler-centric structure of my workspace is visible and instantly accessible. But right now, as I work on this task, I really only care about this handful of classes that are relevant to that particular feature or defect that I'm working on. So what I can do now in the package explorer, I can filter it. So like we saw in the task list, I have this focus button, and as I press the focus button, it filters everything else that's not relevant. So I can always unfocus, shows me everything. Once I focus, it only shows me the things that are relevant. And now watch what happens as I navigate this file. As I touch a method, these methods get added to my task context, and they show up in the package explorer because they're now interesting to what I'm doing.
Your folding's turned off.
All right, and I can even in the Java file, I can fold all the methods that I haven't looked at because they're not interesting to me yet. So I only see the relevant stuff. And as I touch something, it automatically expands, gets added to my task context. And this also works for a number of other things in Eclipse. For example, the Content Assist now lists the things that I've interacted with on top of the list. So I don't have to scroll down the entire list. I just have those methods on top right here. And the same, I haven't opened any types, so that doesn't work. But I can also filter other views like the markers view. So right now it shows me all kinds of problems. If I focus it, it just shows me the problems for the classes that are part of my task context.
So basically, the idea is if you work on anything other than a toy or a tutorial example system, there is more stuff showing in your IDE than you care about at any time. But the key, the whole intuition, the whole idea behind Mylyn is that no matter those systems that we work on will just continue to grow in complexity, right? We will make better frameworks, make better languages to hopefully reduce the lines of code count. But I don't know how many of us have actually been seeing declining code counts in the applications that we're going to be working on when we get back from the conference. So what we've done here is said, okay, that complexity is obviously hurting us badly, dealing with that, navigating it, the fact that even though the IDE can open, Stefan's Eclipse right here has about 9 million lines of code under it. And, the indexing technologies mean it's no problem to display all that. But, neither our brains nor our screens can fit that properly. So anytime we're seeing the structure, instead of showing you everything, which again, the compiler, the build system cares about, focusing only shows you what's relevant to the task at hand. And the way that you interact with the system, so that the navigation and coding activity create this task context. So what you see in any view when you press the focus button is not everything, just the task context. Everything else is still underneath it, but the task context is now explicit. Everything you touch, everything you edit.
And there are a few nice gimmicks. If you can press Control Alt Shift right.
You have to have 6 fingers on one hand to do that.
Oh, it doesn't work in the VM. That's terrible. I should have tried this before. It'll show you a view where it can navigate within your context. Or we have these little plus buttons. So if you know there's a class in this package that's also relevant to me, and I want to quickly navigate to it, then I'd press the plus button, and it temporarily unfilters that package that I clicked on, so I can see all the items under that and quickly add that to my task context.
Yeah, so even though the things are hidden, they're still just a click away. But again, the idea is, if you've got a 24-inch display or a 21-inch display, in your Package Explorer, your Project Explorer, you're not seeing a scroll bar most of the time. Because they don't work, right? If you're seeing a scroll bar, you're missing part of the structure of the code for this task, if all you see is all the files in one package.
All right, so it's so this is really great if I work on one task, but what a lot of time happens is that you're switching tasks all the time. So what's happened with, whether it's because you've adopted Agile, you're sort of more connected now to your user base through tickets, through issues, however it is, we're thrashing a lot in the way that we work today. So you get in on Monday morning, and you actually over the weekend you actually got your energy back up because you've got this cool new feature that you want to work on, that you want to add to a screen in your app. Then, that thing happens when someone says, okay, there's a problem, we got to figure out what's going on here. This looks like a P1. And you start looking around for what's going on. Could this be in your code? Why, you're now investigating this defect. And then you spend the next part of your morning fixing, basically investigating fixes for that defect. You go and you take a very short lunch because you're still worried that this could be a problem that you introduced. You then catch up to see if there's a more severe problem after lunch than the one that you're working on. So you go through your email inbox and do that. Then again, you have to basically get back and restore the context, because every time you do that, your browser tabs go away, your Eclipse editor tabs go away, and you have to recreate that state, right? Every time you get your IDE into a state, just like with a virtual Windows manager, you kind of like the way you laid out your windows, it all gets blown away multiple times a day, or you deal with 80 open tabs. Then you realize that this thing looked familiar to what you were doing previously. And you spend more time swapping and searching because you remember, that this piece of code, this NPE on this line of code was actually related to something else. And then you realize it's this bug from 6 months ago, this old thing that you actually did check. So what you're going to see next is our whole goal of getting rid of all that swapping and searching, basically accepting the fact that if you're working Agile, you're working in this sort of more social, more collaborative way, you're going to end up multitasking throughout the day. You should try not to, but you will. And the whole goal of the task focus interface here, and we'll just show you first for issues, later we'll show you how this relates to commits and code reviews and branches. But the whole goal the whole time is to get rid of all that gray, so you can multitask with a single click. So the idea is that you then recover that time in your day, get a bit more time for fixing that bug because you knew exactly what it was, take a longer lunch, and then hopefully get to work on that new feature by the end of the day. So that's when someone tweets that Mylyn helped them and is making them happy, and that's our whole mission here. Let's look at how that works in practice. So right now I have this task activated. If I deactivate it from the task list, save my changes, my Package Explorer goes back to the state it was previously and where I see everything. So now, if I reactivate the task, it instantly restores all the editors, taking me back to that exact cursor position that I was last at when I worked on this task. So I don't have to remember all this context. I just reactivate that task, and I'm instantly back at that same place, unless Eclipse reorders my editors. And so this helps me if I have multiple tasks that I worked on. I can quickly switch between them, and you see, now I see the context of this task. I activate the next task, takes me exactly to the context of that task. And we have a nice feature in this version where if I have a task that has a stack trace on it, let's see, maybe we can find one here. And I activate this task, Mylyn will actually look at the description of this task, and it'll automatically create a task context for me based on the classes that are mentioned in the stack trace. So as I activate this, you can see I already have a context now. I already know where to start working on based on the stack trace that I see here in this task.
So what you saw previously, the contexts were just fully manual, fully based on your navigation activity. We'll show you how they can actually incorporate navigation activity from other members of your team and so on. But we're trying to provide, now that all of this is in place, we're starting to see a bit other innovations built on top of it, like the idea of pre-populating a context. And an easy way to do that is through a stack trace.
Okay, so now let's look at how we actually work on those tasks. I have two working sets on this workspace. There's the demo working set that just has less projects, so it gets more obvious what we're doing here. So working sets are basically just a way to organize your workspace where you can group certain projects into different working sets. If you work for different customers, for instance, that's very useful. So in this working space, I have a query against my local Bugzilla. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new task. Say improve messaging for J1. And I'm going to submit that to my local Bugzilla. And going to activate this task because I now want to work on this. So what I want to do for this task is I actually want to change this class. I can now focus the context. So this is really simple implementation. It says hello Linux tag. This is out of date. I want to change this to hello Java 1 2012 maybe. And save this change. Now I want to commit this into my version control system. In this case, the project is in Git. And what you'll notice as I do a commit here, the commit message is automatically generated for me. This is based on a template that I specify in my workspace. And you can see that it has a reference to that task that I just activated. So I get this traceability for free. So I commit this change. I can now deactivate this task. And I see in the history now, I see this commit message. And from the context menu of the history view, I can even navigate back to that task. So I can make that full round trip. So since this is a Git repository, I only committed this change locally now. In order to make it visible to my team, I have to push it to the server. So I'm going to push this to upstream. Okay, excellent. And this Git repository is hooked up to a Hudson server. And that Hudson server should now kick off a build. And Mylyn also has this builds view. And the builds view is very similar to the tasks for tasks. The builds view adds the same functionality for builds. So I can basically define my Hudson server or my Jenkins server, subscribe to the build plans on the server that I care about. And then when I refresh that view, it shows me the status of my build plans. So here, I now get this notification that this change that I just submitted kicked off a build, and the result of that build was actually that it failed. And if I open this, I get similar to tasks, I get this rich editor where I see all the different details about the build. I can look at the console output, opens in the Eclipse console. It's just a standard Maven build. I get hyperlinking and so on. And I can also see the test results. And I see that in this case, okay, apparently one of my test cases failed based on that change that I made, and I can see that was exactly this change where I just changed that one line. Okay, so let's look at that. Let's look at that failing test, and I can do that right here from the editor. I can open that in the Eclipse JUnit view, and right from here, I can rerun this test in my local workspace, and I can see, okay, this is indeed failing.
So, I know, I've been trying to count clicks, but it's been about like 15, 20 clicks. There's no login to any server. Everything, all your credentials are there for the servers that you've set up. There's no download. There's no, you never copied, pasted any text to, to get the stack trace in here to figure out what the failing unit test was. There's just this one basically rich native client on your desktop, which is, your IDE, where you do your coding, which is hooked up to the build system. Everything you're watching, whether it's build plans, it changes, you get a notification on your desktop. You can click into it. And everything is wired in. Again, it's just because even though the failure is on the build server of that JUnit test, your IDE is set up to run those JUnit tests. So just a click, and you're running them locally. So it's basically, we treat all of these different ALM servers as just these services for your development. One of them is Hudson or Jenkins. Another one is your SCM system. Another one is your issue tracker. And then this client wires them all up. And the key thing is everything is navigable. So whenever, Stefan, maybe you'll show some build changes in a moment. But note that you're always navigating everything. The structure is explicit, and it's all related to your changes, to your commits, to the part of the code base that you're working on.
I mean, from this test failure, it's very obvious. I changed it here, but I didn't update the test case, which is terrible. So I'm just going to reactivate the task and go back to my test case. Going to update that as well, and this time I'm actually going to run my tests to make sure that they work locally. Okay, great. I'm going to commit this again, and I'm going to amend my previous commit because obviously that commit wasn't right, so I'm just going to amend this, meaning update the same commit, and push this again. And hopefully now this will kick off a build again, and if I refresh this here in my builds view, I now see this little green arrow on my build plan, which means the build is in progress. And as I refresh that again, it should complete, and hopefully now the build is green. I get my little notification pop up, and I can see the change. So what I didn't tell you is that I didn't just push this change into a Git repository, but I actually push that to a Gerrit server. And a Gerrit server from the outside looks just like any other Git repository. But it also adds some workflow, it adds permission control to my Git repository, and more importantly, it allows me to do code reviews on those commits that I did. And just like for Bugzilla, we have a connector, a task connector for those Gerrit reviews. So in my task list, I can define a query against that Gerrit server and say, I want to see all the open changes, all the open reviews on the server. If I now refresh this query, I should see a new code review that is based on the change that I just pushed to the server.
And this is all created automatically for you and shows up in your task list with this notification. There's no additional setup from Stefan's workspace.
And on this code review, I already see a comment thread. This is our Harry Hudson, which is basically the Hudson user that every time there's somebody submits a change, it'll take this change, trigger off a build, and then it'll put the result back on this code review. So I can see this was the first build, result was unstable, second build was successful, and under reviewers, I already have a vote from Harry Hudson that this change was verified. Now, in order to approve this change so that I can actually put it into my master branch, what we still need is a code review. And code review is something that developers have to do. And unless they give me a +2 on this change, it's not going into my main code base. I can also see the different revisions. That was my first change. That was the second one. I can compare them here, so I can see in the second round of changes what I actually did is I changed the test case. But now to actually do this code review, we need a second developer because I shouldn't be reviewing. It's good if I review my own changes, and that's something I would always recommend. But what's really valuable is if we have someone else review our changes. And I think we have Alice in the system as well. So I'm going to add Alice as a reviewer to this code review and start a second instance of Eclipse. So now I'm putting on a different hat. I'm being a different developer who wants to now review this proposed change from Bob.
So now, while you're interacting in your IDE, everything is all the information that's shared is being stored on the server. As soon as Stefan pushed that change, that's in Git. As soon as the review is initiated, the other reviewer gets a notification in their task list in their desktop to either go work on this and take the interruption, or to schedule it for tomorrow with the scheduling facilities. Or to set it for the next sprint, because if you're using Agile, all of the Agile facilities show up in the task editor, if the repository supports it.
And Alice now has a very similar setup with a task list with a query for all the reviews. I can, with 2 clicks, I can take that change, put it into my workspace, I can try it out, I can run it locally. I can review the changes in the compare editor, and right here from my IDE, I can add comments on it and can say, okay, this looks good, or maybe that doesn't look good. Maybe there's something else that Bob should be doing. Maybe he didn't follow our style guide or something else.
And rather than doing this in the web UI where you're missing some coding facilities, you're also able to do it there. But if you're doing it here, you've got all your unit tests. You've got your unit testing, your SCM tool, everything, all the code browsing facilities at your fingertips.
And once I'm done with my code review, I can submit my comments and I can rate that change. So what we were missing was this +2. So I'll provide that for this change. And now if we look under reviewers, we now have all the requirements satisfied, which is something that you can configure in Gerrit. Depending on your workflow, Eclipse, for instance, has this IP clean flag. Unless the committer says that this change is IP clean, it can't be submitted. But the default is that you need a verification and a code review. And now as I submit this change, Gerrit is going to automatically merge it into my master branch, and this code review should now go into the merge state. And if I switch to master and pull all the new changes in the master branch, I should see that I have exactly that change that I just code reviewed and approved is now part of my main code base.
So the key thing is, this process that previously, for large-scale software delivery, these processes are complex. The review stage in Eclipse, we've got IP cleanliness to deal with. There's another example that Stefan pointed out. But the key thing is it's all explicit in the way it's configured in the Bugzilla, Git, Gerrit, and Hudson servers, and then Mylyn just hooks it all up on your IDE. So it's easy for someone to just come in and start contributing to that, to be committing to the code base and have things be built off a branch, show them on the build server that the build failed, rather than needing to set everything up locally. And then it's actually the review process that's the whole staging for this, for the way that we've hooked up everything through CI.
And the last step that Bob would usually do is, since that change is now merged, what Bob would do is persist that task context on the Bugzilla bug. So in the task editor on the bottom, I get this context tab. I can review the entire task context. I can also remove things that I think shouldn't be in there, like this main method. maybe shouldn't be in there. I can mark things as landmarks, saying this was really important for this change. If I interact a lot with certain elements, like a method, then it automatically becomes a landmark and goes bold. But I can always also do that manually. And once I'm happy with this task context, I can say attach context in my task editor, resolve this bug, and then Mylyn takes this task context, externalizes this into an XML format, zips it up, and puts it as an attachment on this task.
So for any contribution to Mylyn, we require task context, because then we see all the API that you referred to, that you looked at, in addition to your code changes. We see the key, basically the key parts of the code base that you looked at and you changed in making this change, which makes reviewing your contributions, 10 times faster for us. And all of these contexts are stored in the Bugzilla repository's attachments or in your issue tracker. So just to quickly wrap up, what you saw here is just the way that we have a certain development process. You've got your own development process. The key thing is that with these tools, both the new generation of code review tools, the new generation of issue trackers, and distributed version control tools, you can configure them to capture your processes. And then this new generation of IDE clients can actually hook into that. What you saw is that this review was staged, but with a contribution from someone we don't know, we didn't even trust, let's say, like a new project member, in our case, someone just from the wild. This was pulled by Hudson in this case. Hudson built it. After the build, Hudson voted. So if, again, they didn't make the unit test pass, as Stefan failed to, it would not get any further before they did that. And they would get a notification on that. A proper reviewer, an external reviewer, was also contributed their reviews. Another review system, like the IP cleansing system, like a black tie system, can then also hook into this. It's approved twice, and then as soon as that approval happens, that automatically triggers the merge, say into master per our policy, and the contribution's been made. So all of this is now explicit and all wired up inside the IDE. So we will just really quick wrap up on what we've got here, and then there are some more talks that will explore some of these concepts. All of this is hooked together through the Mylyn APIs. One of the key things about Mylyn is its frameworks and the way that they've been extended. So you saw it working for our tool stack. The main thing is making it work for your own tool stack and getting some of these benefits for what you work on. These are the tools that are supported, some in the open source ecosystem. If you just Google for Mylyn extensions, you'll see a number of these. Some commercial tools. Tasktop, we have a certification program to make sure that the web service of the ALM tools has all the web service APIs for us to do this automation. We've got some new features in Mylyn 3.8.2 for you to check out. So just Google for Mylyn downloads. You'll get to the new noteworthy. And there have been improvements in the Gerrit and Hudson connectors to support all of this. And again, the key thing is that we're trying to connect, to give you this very personalized connectivity between the way that you work, the way that you need to basically focus on writing code, as our ALM stack, as our tools chains have gotten increasingly complicated. Give this very personalized, connected, and focused look on it. So for the other talks, I'll be speaking about the future of ALM and the social code graphs, so some of the conceptual, 5-year vision stuff around this and where we're going with the open source projects, with a number of partners and open source development efforts. I'll be tomorrow at 10. We'll be showing you work that we've been doing with Oracle around bringing some of these concepts and hosting some of this in the cloud. That'll be tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. and it'll be featured in some of the open world keynotes as well. And Wednesday at 1 p.m. is the Mylyn NetBeans talk. So you can check that out as well. And then there'll be another conceptual talk on Thursday about linked data, how we can hook these things up by expanding the web standards that we have with the work we've been doing with the W3C. So with that, thank you. And